Hi friends, I wanted to talk to you about composition today. Now specifically, I want to talk about compositions in my personal Instagram. Phil thought it'd be a good idea to talk to you guys about my compositional style. Now as a photographer, I'm sure you've sort of felt like you don't necessarily see a style in your own work, and it's been really hard for me to sort of see that throughout my entire career. But when you sit down and look at your Instagram, or you look at a portfolio, or you look at a collection of photos, you start to see themes, right? You start to see how you're doing it and why you're doing it. And a lot of times I'm not thinking a ton about compositional because I've been doing it for so long and I just kind of do what's pleasing to my eye. But when I do and go through the editing process, I understand why I did that or what I'm doing, and I can remember thinking there are now times when I'm very specific, especially with weddings and documenting things about why or how I'm purposefully composing these shots. So let's dive into my Instagram and let's talk about some of the compositions that I tend to lean into for Instagram, and maybe this will help push you and changing your compositions and thinking about it when you're out and shooting. So here's my Instagram. Let's immediately talk about what I shoot most of the time. I'd say most of the time I'm shooting portraits, I'm documenting traveling things, or I'm just out shooting random landscape stuff. Recently I've gotten into surf underwater photography, so we'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about our portraits and our sort of wedding photography stuff real quick. So let's start with, here's a photo of my friend Benaj. I'm going to click on it because it's a collection. And now you can see how this photo of Benaj is, it's just a moment in time, right? But also, like, look at all the negative space. That is a huge theme in my photography. I love having a lot of open space to kind of create sort of a, I don't know, you kind of like just focus in on the subject and let everything else sort of fall off into the abyss. Something about that I think maybe goes into some philosophy of mine of how I feel comfortable, and it makes me feel good that we're so small in this huge, vast world and universe. Maybe that's thinking about it a little too deep, but I love negative space. Now see, these types of portraits too are very close, and I tend to cut off faces a lot. I cut off heads, I cut off arms, but I think that gives you some movement and it makes you feel like you're there. You can see here, I sort of went vertical, but I cut off his head, and it kind of feels more intimate. Here's another negative space shot. Again, it's putting him in this big open world, and to me it's pleasing to the eye. This is a little bit more of a traditional shot. I'm using more of the rule of thirds, and I've put him on the right side. Again, with the centered, you can see how it changes, right? From right, it felt like he was looking into me. That was a good place. Here he's looking down, so I felt like having him symmetrical will add something to the photo. And this was just a really close-up. I love this crop because it makes me think of a movie. It's very cinematic, and he's looking right into the lens, and I think that that's really cool. So you can see how my compositions change based on what's going on. Let's click on this wedding really quick. Here I wanted to focus on the emotion and keep his whole body in frame, but I cut off his head because I wanted the focus to be her hand on the ring and her holding him during their first dance. I really love this photo. It's actually one of my favorite wedding photos I've ever taken. This whole wedding, I was really just sort of playing around with compositions. This one's so close, and actually this photo is inspired by a photo that someone took of my mom and my sister when they were younger, and I just always love that photo and how close and tight-knit and intimate it is. And here again, here's another negative space photo. Again, you're seeing these sort of themes in my own photography. Here's another vertical. Again, I'm cutting faces off. I tend to, when people are looking down or away, I get closer, which means cutting off arms, cutting off shoulders, but it creates this intimacy that I think is really wonderful in photos, especially wedding photos. Again, here's another same one. You're closer, it's more intimate. Even though they're not looking in the lens or paying attention, you feel like you're right there with them, and I really love that. So that's sort of my portrait type stuff. You can look at my landscapes. I tend to tons of negative space, right? Like, look at that sky, look how epic it is, look how wonderful it is they're in there. The horizon is straight, it's in the bottom lower third so that we get a notion for how vast the ocean and the earth is. I really love that sort of side of it. Here's another one, again, negative space. You don't even see what's down below the trees. It's really more about just making it vast and big for me. Surf photography has become a little bit more difficult because I'm swimming at the same time. Here, I put him on the thirds, right? I kept him there, and the horizon is not necessarily in the middle, but it's a little lower to give space for my subject. Here's another negative space photo. Tons of space around a small subject helps you focus in on what he is and where they are, which I think is really good. This is a quick action shot. Again, you can see my style. You start to like look at what you're doing. More negative space, subjects at the bottom of the frame. Here's an example of me getting really tight, really close, getting intimate. Action shot. I probably wasn't thinking much other than avoiding the wave during that one. But here, looking into active documenting places, this is sort of taking in the same idea, right? Tons of negative space up top. I could have lowered it, right, so we can see more people, but the idea was that there are just so many people in one place in a big open arena, and I'm so lucky that that guy's hand was up there. I saw it and snapped it away. I actually have one where the hand is in focus, but it's just not nearly as good as this. You get to really see what's going on in the background, and you understand that this is an epic event. This is an epic thing that's happening. And not only do you get all this negative space, but now you start to see these leading lines that come from the right and the left, the top down like this, and the top right down like that, all leading to a point. My favorite part, aside about this photo, is there's a drone up in the very top part, and I was trying desperately to keep that in frame and still get the negative space I wanted with the leading lines. So, you know, thinking about what's going on is that was a very quick photo, very quick session I fired off, but a lot of that is just practice. You just practice, practice, practice. So, you know, compositionally, I tend to do a lot of negative space, and I tend to look for leading lines. In this one particular too, the Manhattan Beach Pier, I always shoot this pier with the lines going to the upper corner here, and all these lines here. I always, for some reason when I shoot this pier, I always keep the horizon centered because there are so many vertical lines going on and lines going into your face that it just looks nice with that horizon line at the dead center. So, you know, thinking about that stuff is really good. The more and more I look at my photos, the more you can see, look, negative space, tons of leading lines, tons of big open sky at the top. That's just sort of the theme that I like. That's a portrait of me I'm not a big fan of, being close to a horse. So I think if I were to describe my composition to me, when I'm shooting people, when I'm shooting things, when I'm shooting portraiture, I tend to get very close. Like, I can't get close enough. I want to be close, to be intimate, to be there. When I'm shooting or documenting events, when I'm shooting a landscape, I tend to pull back and I make as much space as I can. And sometimes I try to mix the two. I don't think you can get close in a landscape photo, but you can add negative space to a portrait. Like I showed you with Benaj earlier, it's kind of nice to see all that space around him and see the subject in what they are in and how they interact with it, especially if it's a moment like Benaj where he's smiling. He's such a charming dude that it just, all that carries across, and it's okay that there's all this space. So that's sort of my quick compositional you know, analysis of my Instagram. I'm going to dive into some more compositional activity and looking at specific photos here in another video. So thanks for watching.